Guns N' Roses took the world by storm with their debut LP Appetite for Destruction, which came out in 1987. While it was a slow burn, the band was one of the hottest groups around by the end of 1988, and they issued an EP around this time titled GN'R Lies to keep that momentum going and, of course, tide over fans until their full-length follow-up arrived. Well, fans had to wait almost 3 years for the group's epic follow-up records, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. The band weathered delays and lineup changes, with it finally coming out in September of '91. The tour to accompany the album, appropriately titled the Use Your Illusion Tour, spanned over 2.5 years and consisted of nearly 200 shows and left a huge path of destruction in its footsteps. While people like to focus on the riots in St. Louis and Montreal, one part of the tour that I find far more interesting was the 1992 leg they did in South America. Bombings, military coups, death threats, fan deaths, drug cartels resulted in a lot of anxiety and tension that plagued their trip to South America. Former Guns N' Roses drummer Matt Sorum recalled, "I remember getting back to LA. I was totally frazzled. It was one of the scariest tours I've ever been on in my life, and everything was just sort of in disarray." A year and a half into the Use Your Illusion tour, Guns N' Roses were playing sold-out shows to tens of thousands of people a night, but strangely enough, they hadn't made any money. Their spending on lavish parties and going on consistently late resulted in the band paying hefty overtime dues and fines. Couple this with riots and legal issues, and well, they weren't making any money. At one gig in Switzerland that they played in the summer of '92, the band had to pay to keep the trains open because they went on so late that people needed a way to get home. In order to make some money, their manager at the time, Doug Goldstein, booked some dates in South America that spanned over November and December of '92. Matt Sorum recalled, "It was just a different time. It was more like the Wild West out there. Guns N' Roses were one of the first rock bands to go on tour in South America. That was one of the most dangerous times to be in South America. In places like Venezuela, I had these drug benders and it was fear-based. I'd go into a leg of a tour like that." While GNR had played Brazil previously in 1991 as part of the Rock in Rio 2 festival, they never played any other countries on the continent. You have to remember too, at this point in time, South America's touring scene was not run by Live Nation or Ticketmaster, but shady promoters against a backdrop of instability. You know, now that I say that, maybe the promoters and Live Nation and Ticketmaster actually have more in common than I thought. The band was set to play dates in Venezuela, Chile, Colombia, Argentina, in addition to Brazil. Each country presented its own set of challenges. But the tour almost never happened, as bassist Duff McKagan, who was struggling with drugs and alcohol, had just been in his hometown of Seattle playing a show with Metallica as part of that massive co-headlining tour both bands did in the summer of '92. Following that show, Duff's family staged an intervention on the bassist, and he ran out of it and recalled in his autobiography, It's So Easy and Other Lies, that he wasn't going to abandon his band mid-tour. The tour in South America commenced on November 25th, 1992, and ran until December 12th. The first show took place in Caracas, Venezuela. It wasn't just Duff dealing with substance abuse issues, as Matt Sorum and guitarist Slash were also in the same boat. Sorum recalled in his book, "By the time I got to Venezuela, I was in really bad shape. My alcohol and drug habits had long been out of control, but this was the first time I realized that they may cost me my life." It was during his time in Venezuela, Sorum recalled getting a driver to take him deep into the jungle to help him score drugs, only to wake up several days later on his hotel balcony, being woken up by the band's crew, telling him that he had a show to get to. The show in Venezuela seemed to go reasonably well. Slash recalled in his book, "We were scheduled to play the biggest concert in the history of the country, and since there wasn't a venue large enough to hold 45,000 ticket holders, the promoter created one in a huge parking lot. It was an amazing show and all went off well. But as the band landed in Bogota, Colombia for their next show, the Venezuelan Air Force staged a failed coup. It was actually the second attempt that year. While the band members made it out of Venezuela, their crew and equipment didn't. Colombia by this point was extremely dangerous, as drug lord Pablo Escobar was on the run and he was a wanted man by the United States. Foreigners were frequently being kidnapped in the capital, with Sorum remembering in his book, "We each had an SUV and I got into mine. There was one guy on either side of me clutching a machine gun. Two guys sat up front and one of them had a gun. We even had cops with machine guns riding motorcycles in front, beside and behind us. When we pulled outside our hotel, a tank and a loaded arm of guards were out front. I said to our manager, 'What the f is the tank for?' Doug gave me a serious look, to protect you guys. The band members and their crew were basically under lockdown in the hotel in Colombia, with the exception of when they had to go play the show. Guns were originally scheduled to play 2 shows in Colombia, but due to the band's equipment being stuck in Venezuela, they could only do 1. A torrential downpour also caused the stage to collapse, resulting in that 1 show being rescheduled. As the band hunkered down in their hotel, a bomb went off a few blocks away. According to Duff's book, Colombia drug lord Pablo Escobar told the press that we were his friends. We had never met him. I guess he was just sticking it to the US government, using us to have fun. I was already annoyed at the politician questions fired at us at the press conference. Now we'd become inadvertent political pawns in a grand international game. When Guns did perform in Colombia, it started to rain during their performance of November Rain. Axl, Slash, and Duff recalled it being one of the most memorable moments of the tour. November Rain, for its part, was #1 in Colombia for over 60 weeks. Sorum added in his book how Axl and the promoter were trying to explain to the crowd that they had to stop playing the show because the water could conduct electricity and the band members could be electrocuted. He added, but the crowd refused to accept that. They went crazy. They were rioting outside the stadium too. People were throwing fireworks and someone even got killed. The Colombian promoter, according to Sorum, was also quite shady. The fans who had bought tickets to the first cancelled show were told that their tickets were going to be honored at the second show. Well, you soon had double the number of people trying to enter the stadium to see the show. The band had already been paid for 2 shows and refused to give the money back. Their manager, Doug Goldstein, told the Appetite for Distortion podcast, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call that they had our publicist and they were going to hold her for ransom. And I said, well, go ahead. She's not that good anyways. And she was. I was just calling a bluff, basically. Goldstein remembered that the next night the band played their one and only show in Bogota, and the next morning he was woken up to a pounding on his door. He opened the door and a gun pointed at his chest, and he received a letter saying he had a mandatory meeting with the mayor at 3 p.m. Goldstein had hired some off-duty U.S. ambassador security staff. He asked the security staff if there actually was a meeting, to which they responded no. Their manager soon told the band members to pack up their stuff because they needed to get out of the country as fast as possible. A promoter for the Colombia show got wind of this and messaged the police at the airport that the band had drugs on them and that they should be cavity searched and their planes should also be thoroughly inspected. Thankfully for the members, nothing was found. The band landed in their next country in Chile, and things didn't go well from the start. As Guns arrived at the Sheraton Hotel, reporters were waiting in the lobby. Axl charged one of the reporters, damaging his camera and injuring a cameraman. Then the stadium where the band was supposed to be playing had previously served as a prison camp run by dictator Augusto Pinochet. The news made its way to Axl, who said he didn't want to play the show anymore.
Scariest moment you ever had on stage?
We were in Santiago, Chile, and we'd gone on late in Bogota, Colombia, and some people got hurt and stuff like that. So we get to Santiago, and the military comes, and he says, he's got a big machine gun. He says to our tour manager, if Axl leaves the stage early, we will shoot and kill him. Axl was in rare form. Perfect set, perfect time, good show. But it was a little nerve-wracking.
I will say that Reuters at the time reported a slightly different occurrence at the Chile show, reporting that 178 fans were arrested after violence broke out amongst the audience members who were angered by the late start of the show. They went on to report that Rose walked off stage twice and threatened to cancel the remainder of the show if bottles continued to be thrown on stage, and there's even footage of Axl getting upset at an audience member for spitting on him.
Is that like a cute Santiago Chilean custom or what? Crazy little pussy hiding behind that guy. Little punk. Get that punk right behind him. Right there. That guy. The one hiding. Get him. Okay, people. You guys can spit on each other. Have a good night.
The band's next show took place in Argentina, and things only got worse from there. An Argentinian news agency reported that Rose was walking around the hotel only wearing a sheet around his waist at the local Hyatt. He took the sheet off and hugged a security guard. Earlier in the day, Rose was seen swearing at a journalist who tried to interview him. It was widely reported in the press that Guns N' Roses had played Paris earlier in the year. During that stopover in Europe, they allegedly burned an Argentinian flag and were planning on burning their boots after their shows in Argentina because they supposedly hated the country. Of course, all this was made up, but the band did receive death threats from right-wing nationalists, and some politicians even exploited the news, claiming that Guns N' Roses were some sort of outlaws. The band even had to call a press conference, and Axl gave an interview to dispel the allegations and rumors. Adding to the problem was Matt Sorum, who once again was trying to score drugs. He was staying in a ritzy capital of Buenos Aires, but unbeknownst to him, the people he was staying with were part of the Argentinian drug cartel, and he was being tracked by the authorities. Upon returning back to his hotel, federal agents raided his hotel room and threatened to arrest the drummer. But according to Sorum, it was the band's manager Goldstein who saved him. He wrote in his book, "You guys realize that if you arrest him, you're going to have a riot on your hands, right? These kids will tear this town apart. How about we do this instead? We play the 2 shows and we get the out of here, no one gets hurt, and I tell Matt to stay away from the cartels." Goldstein said in other interviews that he frequently carried a briefcase of cash in case he had to grease the authorities. Following those shows in Argentina, it was reported in the press that a teenage girl who was not allowed to attend one of the Guns N' Roses shows by her parents took her own life. The band's final shows of the tour happened in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and Rio. Duff recalled how Axl made some overtures to him, giving some hope that maybe the band wasn't as fractured as he thought it was, and maybe he could get sober with Axl's help. But those hopes were quickly dashed, with McKagan writing in his book, "Half an hour after I left dinner with Axl, he was throwing chairs in the lobby of the hotel and trying to fistfight some guy. It turned out that after the dinner, Axl was playing pool in the hotel and spotted some photographers in the lobby who were bothering him, so he decided to throw a chair down below 30 feet and walked away. Luckily for him, no one was injured, but Rose was charged with endangering human lives, and at the time it was said he could have faced up to a year in prison, but he ended up getting off with a slap on the wrist. But once the tour was over, the band wasn't out of the woods just yet. Slash recalled in his book how once the band landed back home in LA, he was almost deported back to his birthplace of England. He claimed that for some reason he didn't have his US or British passport on him and his work visa had expired, so he was detained by the authorities at LAX. Slash recalled being in a holding area, wearing shorts, his leather jacket, and his iconic top hat. The customs officer was really laying into him, while the younger employee on shift knew exactly who Slash was, which only seemed to anger his boss even more. At the end of the day, Slash had to pay a $100 waiver to get out of the mess, and since he and a security guard didn't seem to have money with them, they had to go panhandling through the airport to get it. Can you imagine Slash coming up to you asking you for money? Slash looked back at the band's tour of South America, recalling, "We had every obstacle possible befall us between our show in Venezuela and the shows in Colombia, and considering the band's chemistry in the recent past, you would expect that we'd have fallen apart under such duress. But that was the thing about Guns, we'd self-destruct when everything was easy. But in those instances when every single factor seemed to be against us, everyone, Axl included, pulled together to make it happen." Fast forward to July of '93, and GNR plays their final 2 shows of the Use Your Illusion tour in Argentina. It marked the final time that Axl and Slash played together on the same stage for nearly 23 years. Upon returning home to the States in '93, Slash recalled in his book how he, Duff, and Matt Sorum had been hanging out a lot, doing a ton of coke, and during this time he put a bindle of the drug in his jacket and forgot about it. He went on to write, "I realized that this thing had been in my jacket for the whole South America tour. I had actually brought coke into South America and back, which is ridiculous because that is the last place where you need to bring your own coke." The band cobbled together a mostly punk covers album in late '93 called The Spaghetti Incident, and they followed it up a year later with a cover of the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil. But the band was basically done. Contractual issues and musical disagreements led to the members leaving the group one by one. Slash quit in October of '96, with drummer Matt Sorum being fired the following year, with Duff departing the same time as well. Duff McKagan, meanwhile, nearly died due to his addiction in early 1994 when his pancreas exploded. He was lucky and he turned his life around. I really recommend his first book if you guys are interested. Being a massive Guns N' Roses fan, I actually found this period of his life when he was recovering to be the most interesting part of his book. Slash and Matt, meanwhile, also got sober, but that would be years later. Duff, Slash, and Matt ended up joining forces in 2002, and formed the supergroup Velvet Revolver with Stone Temple Pilots frontman Scott Weiland. You might remember Velvet Revolver, who had songs like Slither and Fall to Pieces from their triple platinum debut record Contraband. Velvet Revolver ended up being short-lived, breaking up in 2008 after a tumultuous period surrounding their second record Libertad, which really wasn't that commercially successful. Axl spent the next decade writing Guns N' Roses' long-awaited follow-up Chinese Democracy. The band thankfully reunited with Slash and Duff in 2016, and they've been on tour ever since, and there's been some sporadic releases during this period of time. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories. Take care.